Welcome to Our Hometown, the show where we take a look at the people and places that make this area unique. I'm your host, Jim McCallum. On this special edition of Our Hometown, we're taking a look at the opioid addiction crisis here in Brunswick County. So stay with us as we discuss this very important issue that affects our hometown. I'm speaking with Judge Ola Lewis and our Sheriff John Ingram. Welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thank you.
Judge, we're here to talk about the opioid crisis. Tell us how you first became aware of the opioid crisis.
Well, I became aware in the job that I do every day in terms of seeing individuals in the court system with offenses that are truly drug-related, whether it's breaking and enterings, trespass, or DWIs. The gamut runs all the way up to the more serious felony offenses.
The drug treatment court is one of several courts that you have, and so over time you've become aware of that, but it's a much bigger problem than that now.
Yes, sir, absolutely. The crises have certainly grown over the years. I can remember a time in Brunswick County when we did not hear the word heroin. We did not hear the word overdose, and now it's unfortunately commonplace.
Before we went on the air, I noted that we had 47,000 overdose deaths in the United States in 2014. That figure is surely above 50,000 now.
Yes, sir. In fact, the opioid crisis has taken more lives than even automobile accidents.
You've organized, along with others, the Brunswick County Opioid Task Force. Let's talk about that. Tell us how it began, where we are, and more importantly, where we want to go.
Yes, sir. Well, I was invited to a New Hanover County Opioid Task Force meeting, and during that meeting they were discussing issues that were unique to New Hanover County. And as I began to travel home, I started thinking about all the differences between the two counties, though we are merely separated by a bridge. And I contacted the sheriff and asked him to join me in creating our own opioid task force. New Hanover County has mass transportation. We do not have that luxury in Brunswick County. New Hanover County has inpatient treatment facilities and beds available. We do not have that in Brunswick County. So it's addressing those needs and concerns like transitional housing that we need in Brunswick County that is not here compared with what they have in New Hanover County.
It's a multifaceted problem, is it not? And
yes.
It's not one that you in the courts or the sheriff can resolve. We all need to be involved. Talk about that.
Yes, sir. I would envision a holistic consortium approach in terms of getting individuals from all walks of life to come together to help us with creative solutions to this epidemic. We have invited members of the clergy. We have, of course, invited law enforcement. We have invited parents who have lost children and loved ones to the addiction crisis. And it is going to take everyone coming together, putting their shoulder to the wheel, if you will, to come up with solutions to how we combat this problem.
And I've attended several of those meetings.
Yes, sir.
With a number of additional meetings to occur. We've had 80, 90, 100 people at those?
Yes, sir.
From all walks of life.
Physicians, pharmacists, nurses, doctors, and so it's just really important that we engage the entire community.
Well, and the reason we're here today is to try to make certain that our viewing audience really understands the scope of this problem.
Yes, sir.
Right. Sheriff, may I turn to you? The one statement that I remember you're making at our last gathering was that we can't prosecute our way out of this.
That's correct. You know, so many times in the past, especially when I started in law enforcement and in particular in the drug enforcement end of it, the method was simple. We arrested everybody involved in it, whether they were a user, dealer, dealer, user, whatever it might be, run them through the court system and let the judicial system deal with them on that end. But we realize in law enforcement, or at least the vast majority of us do now, that that approach is antiquated, and it certainly is not making any progress in dealing with the real issue, which is the epidemic of addiction that we're dealing with. That's what it's really all about.
It's more broad than what we call the opioid crisis.
Exactly. And we looked at a number of ways to approach the drug enforcement end of it over the years. And oftentimes we describe it as it's a business. It's the law of supply and demand.
Right.
Well, looking at it from that aspect, if we can reduce the demand, we will certainly affect the supply. And in putting together this task force, I know there's a lot of areas that need to be identified, but more importantly, those people that are addicted, suffering from this addiction, if we can get them into treatment programs, get them in through the drug treatment court program and other programs that are available, and help them be able to live some sense of a normal life, living with, managing their addiction. And it's important to understand that they don't get cured from addiction.
And we're going to talk some more about it, but addiction is a disease.
Exactly.
And even though you're and your law enforcement community are here to enforce the laws, it's much more than a violation of the law. It's an addiction.
That's correct. And we understand that, and we want to see those people be able to get treatment and be able to live a productive life. We don't want to see them continue to be part of the revolving door in and out of our detention center,
Right.
part of the judicial system. That's not helping anyone.
And I want to stay with the main issue, but I want to divert for just a minute to remind our viewers of the cost of that's incurred by the law enforcement community in dealing with large numbers.
Oh, it is.
The cost of having your hundreds of deputies out on the streets, the cost of incarceration, the long-term costs are very substantial.
They are. I mean, if you look at it, it's well over $80 a day to incarcerate someone in our detention facility, and those numbers add up very quickly. And that doesn't account for any medical expenses that may be incurred while they're with us, because we're ultimately responsible for that while they're in our custody.
Right.
And then if you look at it from that end, we have officers that are responding, and as well as other emergency personnel.
Emergency personnel, right.
In general, first responders
They're
responding to
kept
these
very busy
emergencies. Yes.
attending to those.
They are. And, we've equipped all of our officers with naloxone, which is the rescue
Right.
drug, and all of EMS and the vast majority of fire are carrying it as well. And, it's amazing the amount of resources that are actually spent on trying to respond to and dealing with one overdose.
And that leads me to this fairly good conclusion, and that is that in terms of society's cost, it may be cheaper to spend some money up front rather than at the end with your law enforcement community.
Well, what's so disheartening about it, years ago, the legislators defunded mental health. And when they did that, they ended up dumping all of the people that were suffering from mental health issues and receiving treatment into local confinement facilities, such
Right.
as our detention center. And that has put an unbelievable cost on the taxpayers of this state, not to mention they're not getting any help. We are not a treatment provider. We're
Right.
not equipped to deal with mental health
Correct.
issues.
Right.
And we're not equipped to deal with drug treatment issues as well. So, a lot of families are faced with the issue of either leaving their loved ones in our facility when they're arrested for various drug offenses to detox, and we do have systems in place to deal with the detox process, but after that, there's no treatment
Right.
Available. And that's when we need those options available here in the county.
Absolutely.
And readily available, so we can get people that are ready to take that step into those programs.
Let's explode a myth. And the myth is that those who are addicted are the poor, the underclass, those on welfare or otherwise. That's not true.
That is not true. It knows no boundaries. It's behind the gates. It's on the beaches. And, you know, just recently I learned that one of our law enforcement partners in this county doesn't really think they have an issue. And
Really?
for that to actually come out of someone's mouth in law enforcement is shocking to me, because every area of our county, every area in this region has a problem. If you know, I sit on the board of directors for the National Sheriff's Association, and talking with sheriffs from across the country, without a doubt, this is one of the biggest problems we have ever faced nationwide.
Nationwide, correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Judge, back to you. Let's talk about the future of the opioid task force, where we're going, and where we want to land.
Yes, sir. Well, what I envision is when we come together, that we put forth a platform that we present to our local board of county commissioners and our legislative delegation. If we need to take that platform to DC, we're willing to take that platform to Washington, DC, listing what we see are the positives in Brunswick County and what we know to be the negatives. Sure. And how we need to address those issues. For instance, most churches are open on Wednesday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. We would like to see the faith-based community come forward with more opportunities to have NA and AA meetings in their
Maybe to use
doors.
their vans for transportation,
Sure.
Which is an issue here in the county.
Absolutely, to provide safe places for children to go after school. So there are a lot of ideas that we have that we're going to put to paper, and so that individuals can read and know and see what we need.
I want to emphasize public awareness. We're here today so that our viewing audience will become aware of these issues, and of course the public can be involved.
Yes, sir.
Awareness is a key to this. Speak to that for just a minute.
Well, we have launched a Facebook page for our Brunswick County Drug Treatment Courts in an effort to keep people informed of what is indeed happening in our community and these meetings. We invite anyone who wants to come to work with us or who may have a creative idea to come and sit down with us. I do believe that it's time for us to get together and come up with a solution to this opioid epidemic. And thank you so much for having us here today.
Absolutely.
Because this heightens the awareness. We've had very good connections with our news media, and they're helping us to get the word out. And so thank you so much.
It's a problem here in Brunswick County. It's a problem nationwide. We all need to commit to become involved and to deal with this scourge on our population.
Yes, sir.
Judge Ola Lewis.
Thank you.
Sheriff, thanks for being with us.
Listen. All it took was someone who would insist that I just try.
Suddenly, everything was turned around because they judge you.
You tell them, I don't need this.
No one is going to understand.
Unless they've been through it, how can they?
Then one day you realize,
You feel so hopeless.
I need help. I need help.
You feel so hopeless.
Then one day you realize,
Unless they've been through it, how can they understand?
I don't need this.
No one's going to judge you.
suddenly everything was turned around because they insist that I just try.
All it took was someone who would just
Listen.
My guests are Mr. Ray Wood and Mr. Don Flattery, both with great stories and insight on the opioid crisis. Mr. Flattery, may I start with you?
Certainly.
First, I would note that you're a very new resident of Brunswick County.
I am. I've been in beautiful Brunswick County for all of 6 weeks.
Wow.
Moving from the Northern Virginia area, just south of Washington, D.C.
Well, and it speaks to this crisis we're about to discuss by indicating that you got involved as soon as you moved here.
I did. Jim, I am a member of the Virginia Governor's Task Force on Prescription Drug and Heroin Abuse, and I'm also a member of the Fairfax County Community Group responsible for creating a community action plan to address this issue. But my most important credential is that I'm an impacted parent, having lost my 26-year-old and only son, Kevin, to an opioid overdose about 2.5 years ago.
Wow. Well, we appreciate your being here and your commitment to this and your expertise on the national level. Let's talk about what is an opioid.
An opioid is a synthetic form of an opiate derived from the poppy plant. Those opioids can be manufactured by pharmaceutical companies in the form of prescription drugs that many of us who have been treated for pain are very familiar with, or it can be a street drug like the one that we often know as heroin. There are new dangers, new opiates that are being introduced into society that are far more dangerous, such as fentanyl and carfentanil.
Wow. But the terms OxyContin and there's another term that goes along with are common names for opioids.
Some of the common prescription opioid drugs are OxyContin, hydrocodone, Percocet, Vicodin. Those are all opioid drugs that are made from the same source material. They're highly addictive. They're molecularly similar to heroin. They cause respiratory distress. They're equally as addictive, and they can cause overdose deaths in the exact same way.
We know we have a crisis. Let's talk about, let's take you back to the 1990s and talk about how we got here, very briefly.
The anatomy of this crisis began in the late 1990s when there was a movement in this country and among physicians to be more compassionate in their treatment of pain.
Well-intentioned, of course.
Absolutely well-intentioned, but it had an unintended consequence. Pain was perceived at the time to be widely ignored. Physicians were encouraged to work with their patients to treat them more aggressively for pain, and there was a movement to create pain measures as a fifth vital sign. And that led to, in my estimation, and in the estimation of many clinicians, the overuse and overprescription of opioid prescription drugs, to the point that 2 years ago there were over 259 million prescriptions written for pain in this country. The US has 5% of the world's population, but we're using 80% of the world's opioids.
Wow, wow. From one of the meetings that I attended, it was indicated to me that in Europe it's much less of a problem because we've told patients you're going to have some pain.
In Western Europe, they do treat pain differently, particularly chronic pain. Long-term chronic pain is not something that Western Europe's physicians aggressively use prescription opioids for. They do use opioid drugs for surgical recovery, for orthopedic injuries, and for short-term uses. But for chronic long-term pain conditions such as fibromyalgia, diabetic neuropathy, indiscriminate back pain, they use other treatments that do not involve opioid drugs, non-steroidal drugs, heat treatments, physical therapy, electric stimulation, other alternatives to opioid drugs.
Mr. Wood,
yes, sir.
We've spoken before about community and the importance of community and the importance of community involvement. Talk to our viewing audience about those issues.
Yeah. As we continue to face this epidemic, we're going to need all hands on board.
Right.
And as we start to look into the community, some of the things that I've noticed coming from the treatment side, as we get out into community and talk to individuals, a lot of individuals feel that they're isolated from the situation.
True, yeah.
So one of the things that we're trying to do right now is break down stigmas, break down mindsets, and help everybody in the community understand that they are all a part of it. So as we look at community in context, just to paraphrase definition, is a fellowship of individuals who have the same values. And we all want to have the right values of helping individuals heal from something, a disease, as we talked about.
And if it's not in my home, it's in my neighborhood.
It's in my
close
neighborhood.
by,
And so
right?
that's still in the house. That's
In
still
the
in our
house. I like
community
that.
house.
The community
It's still in our
house.
community house. So
Right.
everybody is affected by what is going on. So what we would like to do is build community awareness by having more touch points that individuals can get to and talk to someone about their addiction or receive help. And churches, we have more churches than we have grocery stores to some degree.
True.
We have more churches than we have community centers. So there is just a good place to start in helping our clergy and our community offer safe places for individuals to come, to have a meal, to fellowship, and just
Sure.
talk about it. So one of the other things is breaking down some of the anonymity that goes along with it. Being anonymous about what is going on in this crisis, we appreciate AA, we appreciate NA, but we want to start breaking down some of those barriers so people are willing to talk about it within the community and not say it's not affecting me or my
Community discussion.
Community discussion, community awareness.
Hopefully
and
this show
everybody
will assist in that.
That's our goal.
Yeah. We're exploding myths in this show today. One is that if I'm an addict, it's my fault. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the challenge that a lot of individuals get in is that it is a willful thing that we do in concept once we start.
True.
But beyond there, it is a disease. So once you made that first contact with a drug, you have a high potential to get addicted to that drug. And once you're addicted to that particular drug, some of the ability that you have to get off of that increases. And it's harder for you to get off of that drug. Yeah. So that makes it, in a way that it becomes a little bit more challenging. And we need people to change that mindset because they just think just because you started the drug that you immediately can get off of the drug.
Mr. Flattery, as difficult as it is, tell us your personal story, if you would.
My son Kevin is an example of the notion that there is no stereotype for those who become addicted to opioid drugs. He grew up in a wonderful household, two-parent family. He was an excellent student, attended a Jesuit prep school, was a varsity ice hockey player. He had all of life's and God's blessings. He was active in his church and in his community. He was a talented filmmaker, and after graduation from the University of Virginia in 2010, worked in the film industry in Hollywood, California. He suffered from depression and anxiety and began self-medicating with a widely available drug, OxyContin, in California. He became dependent and addicted, and when he did so, he returned home to us and tried all forms of treatment, inpatient treatment, intensive outpatient treatment, medically assisted therapies that are available today, and abstinence-only step program support. Days before he was to try a new medication-assisted drug called Vivitrol, he used again and he did not recover. But I really would like to reinforce that my son's story really puts a highlight on the notion that our nation is suffering from an epidemic of addiction, and that it knows no boundaries, because that's what epidemics do. They strike people from all backgrounds, with all support systems. And so, as one of your other guests, the sheriff, indicated, this issue is touching people behind gated communities, in every parish and in every city and county in the country.
Thank you for telling that difficult story. We're so appreciative that you're here and that you've committed, along with the rest of us, to fighting this scourge 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, thank you. I cannot abide one more lost life and hear another story of another family suffering the unspeakable pain that comes with this. It's destroying far too many young people. It's affected my son. It's going to affect your daughter, our neighbors. And if we do not personalize their stories, then we lose something. And we have to keep pointing out to our fellow community members that if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone.
Okay, one issue we haven't discussed is treatment. Would you tackle that, Mr. Flattery?
Yes. Many task forces in the country are trying to grapple with this particular issue, and they are correctly focusing on a number of areas, including prevention, developing tools and techniques and information to prevent people from becoming addicted in the first place. The second set of strategies revolves around saving the lives of those who are already addicted, and I see a tremendous amount of progress there. But the most difficult arena and one of the most necessary to really develop is treatment. Nationally, only 1 in 10 people with substance use disorder are receiving any form of effective treatment.
That's a stunning.
It's an enormous national gap, and it is no different here in Brunswick County. Since my arrival in Brunswick County, I've learned a great deal about the lack of resources for treatment here in the county, and it's something that this task force will have to grapple with. The national statistics suggest that for every $1 that we can invest in treatment, we can save $7 in direct measurable costs, such as avoided incarceration, avoided unnecessary medical costs, avoided family court costs for children who have to be removed from a home. And then there are harder to measure costs like lost productivity and absenteeism associated with addiction. But in the long term, the investment in treatment will provide multiple benefits downstream. And until we address that treatment gap, all the good work we're doing in prevention and keeping those alive will never be turned around. The public awareness and the national awareness of this issue has increased dramatically.
Mr. Wood, we know that a number of segments of our society are involved. Tell us more about who's involved and who else we need to get committed.
Right. Currently we have Opioid Task Force, which we talked about. We also have our treatment providers that are already existing. We also have individuals from the community, the Civil Air Patrol, the Lions Club, different individuals.
Civic clubs,
churches, and many people who are just starting to gain awareness but are willing to help in this situation.
Right.
And we're thankful.
Much more work to be done.
Yes. We also have community organizations, AA, NA, Families Anonymous, Al-Anon, all of those organizations are there.
Thank you. I think of those. And again, in the brief few moments we have, Mr. Flattery, there are a number of other myths that we might explode very briefly. Tell us a few of those.
Well, the most basic myth that I would like to dispel is that addiction is a moral failing of some kind.
Right.
It is not. This is a public health issue. It is a disease that affects nerve function and brain chemistry. The second myth that I would like to dispel is that this is simply a matter of abuse, that this is a choice. People can come to their addictions through medically prescribed pathways.
Correct.
Overused medications for periods of time longer than necessary can lead people to become addicted.
In fact, trauma is one of the reasons for the beginning of an addiction.
There are many kinds of traumas. There can be psychological traumas that also are implicated in someone's pathway to addiction. In many cases, people can have lost loved ones, they can have emotional abuse, they could have physical abuse, they could have accidents. There are all kinds of traumas that we as individuals can suffer that can contribute to their journey toward addiction. But and that's not an uncommon story among those who are addicted. They often have coincident psychosocial issues that have to be treated along with their addiction. And that's where effective treatment really can be most successful, when we treat these coincident issues. It certainly cannot happen when someone is incarcerated. We need trained professionals to address both of those kinds of issues.
Thank you both for your expertise, for your personal story. We began by reminding our community that this is the public health crisis of our time. I just said it again because it's so important to know, and you gentlemen have contributed substantially to our knowledge. Thank you, Mr. Flattery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us on Our Hometown. If you have a topic that you'd like to see discussed on our show, visit us at atmctv.com to tell us about it. Thanks again, and join us next month as we explore more of Our Hometown.
Stay connected with your community channel. Like ATMC TV on Facebook today.